Yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, because now it's like COVID. We can look back and go, oh, should we have worn masks? Should we have had all the lockdowns? Well, we do that with the benefit of hindsight. When you look, when you're looking back, then you know with certainty. So I was in the point in the market where there were no competitors, and I was opening 10 clinics a year. In reality, I could have been opening 30 clinics a year. I could have choked out the competition. I should not have let the competition had a chance to breathe. Now, in that process, some competitors came through. Now, they ended up being a very distant second and a distant third and a distant fourth, but it's the combination of number two, number three, number four, number five that I allowed them a chance to get a foothold. I could have easily shut out the markets very early, and this is the benefit of experience, the benefit of hindsight. But I'm very happy with where I ended up.
Hello guys, and welcome back to the Face It podcast. Today we have a very special episode in a long line of very special episodes. We are travelling up and down the UK to visit some of the industry's leading practitioners and experts in their fields, whether that is in aesthetics or in beauty. These people have influenced their industry in some way, have achieved huge success, and are full of amazing stories, inspiration and advice for both you and for me. We'll be visiting them on site at their own clinics, salons or studios and getting their views, their thoughts and opinions on their careers. There will be something in every single discussion to take away and apply to your own business. So stick around and grab yourself a pen. Sometimes all it takes is a small nugget from an entire conversation that can spark the biggest change in your business. So without further ado, it's time to welcome our guest. Hello and welcome back to the Face It podcast. I'm your host Jessica, and today we have an incredibly special guest on the show, someone who should and I'm sure will have inspired many of you listening today. But before I introduce him, I wanted to give a little bit of background to this person and why we are so fortunate to be able to pick his brains today on business, life and of course the world of aesthetics. You may be familiar with Laser Clinics Australia. Our guest today co-founded LCA and successfully built the company into Australia's largest clinic of aesthetics clinics, delivering thousands of treatments a year, topping 2 million treatments in 2016 and generating over $80 million in annual revenue. The two founders built LCA into 72 clinics across Australia with over 800 employees and eventually sold their business for a staggering $650 million. It's quite an insane story and a legacy in the world of aesthetics, of course. So as always, if you like what you hear today and want to hear more stories like this one, then please rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We want to bring you as much expert insight and inspiration as possible, and engaging with us in this way really helps us to do just that. But now, of course, it's time to actually introduce our guest today, Babak Moini, co-founder of Laser Clinics Australia. Welcome to the Face It podcast.
Hey Jess, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Babak. How are you doing?
Incredibly well, ready to go. Let me
Sure,
see if
I
I
mean,
can hit it out of the park.
It's evening there, isn't it? It's early morning here. So thank you for joining me. I know you've probably had a long day.
It's a long day, but a fun day every day.
That's what I like to hear. That's the attitude and spirit. We, of course, have a big community of practitioners here at Faces at varying levels of their careers. Some have got clinics, some have got multiple clinics, some don't have clinics. They're literally just starting out. So I suppose my first question to you is going to be, how did you get started in aesthetics? And at that time, why did you want to start clinics?
Jess, that's an interesting question. I started off life as a mathematician, as an actuary. I hated what I
Wow.
did, and I had excess body hair. I went and had a treatment for my excess body hair, but around the year 1997, it cost about $1,500 an hour,
Wow.
which was, the equivalent of that would have to be $4,000 an hour today. It was a very specialized treatment, only undertaken in dermatologist offices. I thought to myself, why does a treatment have to be so expensive? I looked around and I couldn't find a cheap alternative. At the same time, I read about Ryanair, and how they had made flying affordable for the masses. I thought, why can't we make cosmetic treatments affordable to the masses? That was the beginning of how I thought about this industry, but it took a long time to execute. It involved me initially setting it up in the year 1999, failing in the year 2006, and starting again in the year 2008. But basically, the concept was make cosmetic treatments available to the masses and in a retail environment.
That's really interesting. And it's interesting that you sort of launched with that initial beta version, maybe you might want to call it, and then had to relaunch. You know, what was the reason for that initial failure? Was it because you were trying to do too many things at once and it just
Yeah,
crashed,
so
or
so to understand business, to understand money, they don't teach you this. Your parents don't teach you this. Your friends don't know. Teachers don't teach you this. At universities, they don't teach you this. You know, you do economics at university, it's all theoretical. No one teaches you what is it like to negotiate a lease with a landlord. What does a personal guarantee mean? What does a balloon payment at the end of a lease mean on a piece of laser equipment? What does depreciation actually mean in real life? How do you deal with employees? How do you deal with employees who aren't performing well? How do you motivate employees? None of these is taught to you. So I had to learn as I went along. As I did this over a period of many years, I failed and I learned from my failures. So the second version of the business was done in a more coherent, systematic way than the first version. And it was the right market timing. The stars were aligned at exactly the right moment.
and I think that's really, really important for everyone that's listening. You know, I think that's what's going to be so amazing about this conversation is bringing in that business side, because we quite often just talk about treatments and stuff like that, but it's a huge portion of what people are trying to do. And you know, and failure sometimes. Was it your first business? Just out of interest, was it?
In effect, it was. I had some souvenir stores, but they didn't teach me about managing a cosmetic business. And what people don't realize, selling Botox is very different to selling, I'm showing my age here, but selling a postcard. It's different to selling a carton of milk. There's an incredible amount of legislation that goes with it, compliance, and you've got to there's a lot of your focus that's got to go on compliance and not just on business. So it's bringing those two together and making the magic happen.
So it was a really big, steep learning curve in that respect then. And like you say, you had to go out and make those mistakes before you could really correct them in the second edition of LCA.
Correct. And I was the first to do this, so there was no one to learn from.
Yes.
There wasn't. I couldn't sit down and go, oh, someone else has done this. Let
Mm.
me take their model and make it better. We were the first. We were the original greenfield site. There was, if I go and open, I don't know, if I want to sell travel, there will be thousands of people who've worked in travel and I can bring their experience. But if I wanted to open up cosmetic clinics in the year 2000, there was no one with retail experience in the cosmetic space. There was no one who understood Botox, fillers, laser hair removal, skin treatment, skincare, and to bring all of that together. There was no one who had worked marketing in that area. So everything was fresh.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, bringing it back to timing being everything. I think this gets forgotten in these kind of discussions quite a lot. I think people forget timing is a really important piece. You know, and as much as people don't want to hear that, maybe sometimes that's why it gets missed, because people don't want to hear it. But it is a very important piece. You know, and
Yeah, I couldn't do today what I did in the year 2008. The market is substantially different. At that stage, I was the only one. Imagine if you're the only provider of coffee in all of London. You're going to have a queue going around for kilometers around the blocks. Whereas now, it seems to me that there are, well, certainly in the Australian market, too many providers, and there's been downward pressure on prices. Yet wages to employees and rents have gone up, so it squeezes the margins. So if you're setting up today, you're going to do this substantially differently to the way that you did it 20 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, I can completely agree. And I think that it's only going to continue that way. And I don't know whether, it could be different in Australia, but I think certainly it's down to potentially the access to training as well, and the quality of training, specifically here in the UK. It is tricky for me to speak about Australia. I'm not sure what your laws are, but for us at least, there's not masses of regulation. So it's just meant that training's been so accessible and so relatively cheap for pretty much anyone to join. So like you say, it's just created this market where there's probably more practitioners than there are high quality paying clients.
If you look at this from a perspective of a registered nurse, there, and I'm talking in Australian dollars here, nurses used to make, let's say, around 80,000 a year, and they could switch to cosmetic medicine and make 180,000 a year. Now that differential has squeezed down. In the public hospitals, they're up to earning about 100,000 a year. In cosmetic medicine, they're making 110, 120, but that's got a question mark on it. They've got to run around and generate that business. So you've got certainty of making 100,000, or you can take a risk and try to make 110, 120, 130. So it's not just, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. Let me run on this, run at this. It's the laws of economics. When there is a lot of money being made in a particular space, more providers move in, margins get squeezed, and more people then you've got to differentiate yourself based on training, based on marketing, based
Marketing,
on service.
sure. So kind of bringing it back to yourself, in the right at the beginning of your journey, what was the goal to create as many clinics as possible when you first started this, or did that just happen as time went on? Did you see the size of the opportunity and that kind of just evolved?
No, it just happens. Um, I I uh, I I tell people, and I get a lot of people who reach out to me for business advice, and I tell people I've had one very good idea. A lot of that comes down to luck. I've subsequently figured out the system whilst I've come through on the other end, but at the beginning, I thought it would be great to have one clinic, and I have a place to go for laser hair removal for my family and myself, and I'm doing something I like, and I'll make a bit of money. The first clinic made substantial money. I thought, well, why don't I take the money from the first clinic and open a second clinic, then use the money from the first two to do the third one? And before you knew it, I became the dominant player in the country. But what my competitors were doing, they were too busy on the sidelines saying this model will not work. No one will want discounted cosmetic treatments. So my competitors gave me a 5-year head start. By the time they figured out what was happening, it was too late. But when I started, I didn't have a coherent plan. But if I started today doing anything, I would make sure there is a specific plan and there's a budget, and I would compare actual returns versus budgeted returns on a daily basis.
And that comes on. Do you think that maybe your mathematician background helped with you spotting those trends quite early? Do you think because
No,
your business in
yeah.
numbers?
No, I get asked that all the time. If anything, it works against me. I am an actuary. Actuaries are taught to be conservative. So so we set insurance premium. So we look at the likelihood of a car crashing. Then we go, let me put a 50% margin of safety on this because the worst can happen. So as I was looking at my clinics, I kept putting on this margin of safety. So I went from 1 to 80 clinics In reality, I should have gone from 1 to 180 clinics. But my inherent conservatism that I was taught at university and in the workplace held me back.
And I don't know whether that's had a positive impact, or like you say, a negative one, in the sense that you maybe could have gone and built quicker and larger. But in some ways, I'm thinking that conservative, you're looking at that in a different way. I
Yeah,
feel
but
like that's maybe a positive that you did.
yeah, yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, because now it's like
Mm,
COVID. We can look back and go, oh, should we have
sure.
worn masks? Should we have had all the lockdowns? But we do that with the benefit of hindsight. When you look, when you're looking back, then you know with certainty. So I was in the point in the market where there were no competitors, and I was opening 10 clinics a year. In reality, I could have been opening 30 clinics a year. I could have choked out the competition. I should not have let the competition had a chance to breathe. Now, in that process, some competitors came through. Now, they ended up being a very distant second and a distant third and a distant fourth, but it's the combination of number two, number three, number four, number five that I allowed them a chance to to get a foothold. I could have easily shut out the markets very early, and this is the benefit of experience, the benefit of hindsight. But but I'm very happy with where I ended up.
Absolutely, especially when that wasn't, you initially created this clinic, like you say, for yourself, for family, for friends. I think that's quite an important point to point out here as well, actually, is that you created something out of a want, a need, and a desire and a passion to do it. And actually, you spotted the opportunity and that the market was right as well off the back of that.
Yeah, Jess, I had excess body hair, so I knew what it meant to the clients. I was passionate about removing my own hair. I knew how this was the bane of many people's lives. They wanted a solution. I didn't set up a business to make money. I set up a business thinking, what would I want as a consumer? I didn't want to pay $1,500 an hour. I had excess body hair, but I wanted to treat that. And I wanted it in a retail environment. I wanted a place that was open 7 days a week. I wanted a place that the customer service was friendly. It wasn't this arrogance of the dermatologist who said, no, no, you have to wait for me. I will run 30 minutes late and I'm going to cut your appointment short. And I don't care if I get missed patches. So it was coming up with a business I was passionate about. And then it happened to also make money because that's what the consumer wanted.
Because that was your experience, you based your business model on your experience, and the things that were lacking in your experience, which is massive. Because if there's one of you in Australia, there's probably going to be hundreds and then thousands of you.
Well,
That's the
there
thing.
ended up being, Jess, what I did before I bought the first laser, I took out a dummy ad in a newspaper. It cost me $400. I thought, I'm going to test to see if there's a market here for laser hair removal. With that advertisement that cost in the year 1999 $400, I think I took 400 calls. So
Wow.
talking about beta testing, market testing, I knew there was a market there. So knew I had to get in there instantly. The market was screaming out for this.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really, really good for those that are listening, advice wise. And this is the thing, I know it's hard to find though, and we need to point that out. It can be quite the needle in the haystack trying to find that missing link. Sometimes you've just got to elevate a business just 1% better than your competitor, because that's all you can really achieve, and that's going to make you stand out. But in some cases, like you come across something that is, completely new or doesn't exist. It's an innovation. But those are rarer. I think that's worth
Yeah,
mentioning. That's
yeah,
harder to
but
find.
yeah, and it's worth mentioning that I didn't realize I was there in the eye of the storm. I didn't realize that I accidentally stumbled upon it, but it took me 3, 4 years to figure out, oh my goodness, this
Oh
is
my
something
gosh.
incredible. So you don't notice it whilst you're in there. It takes you a while. You've got to come through the other end, and then you realize people find it difficult to get 4 phone calls, let alone 400. It's hard for them um, to generate positive cash flow from day one. I mean, we were paying off our clinics in the space of 5 months. So
That's
our
incredible.
capital, we were getting it back in 5 months. And hence why I say we should have opened up at a much faster rate than we did. If you're getting your money back in 3 years, you're doing well. At that stage, we were every 5 months, we were making our money back. So you'd open 3 stores, then you could open another 2 stores using the money there.
I mean, to create a successful chain like that, is there, a blueprint that you would be able to rinse and repeat today? That regardless of the business, it doesn't just have to be aesthetics, or did it only work for that particular business
Yeah.
model?
Well, it certainly worked at that particular time with that particular industry. But let me just talk to you generally about what I see in aesthetic medicine. I walk past a lot of beauty salons, a lot of cosmetic clinics. Their front window is littered with advertising. You don't know what they sell because they've got 20 messages. They haven't taken one simple message. One, tell me what you're selling. Two, tell me the price you're selling it. And if it's a special offer, when does it run out? But basically, what you sell and what is the price. But what people do is they put up these various stickers or on their TVs. They've got signs like cool sculpting. To the average person, cool sculpting means nothing. They don't know what it is. They and then they have a picture of a snowflake. It's summer in Australia. Why would you have a snowflake on your window? And then the door to their clinic is closed. The moment you have a client, having a potential client, having to open the door to walk in, you've lost 80% of the clients. If they don't know what the price is, people are too shy to come in and ask. The person you have at the front door should understand all the treatments, should have a lot of product knowledge, should be polished, should understand sales without being pushy, and should know how to follow appropriate legislation. In Australia, that's very important. Now, in effect, there are clinics where I walk past the front of the clinic. There are three beauty therapists. They're all on their phone. They're not looking up. And the door's closed. Or the phone rings at the clinic. They don't like the phone ringing, so they'll go and put it in a drawer so they don't hear it, or they put it on mute. So it's the little things that people don't do. But going back to your question, I would find it difficult. It's impossible to replicate the same success in the year 2024 as it was in the year 2014. That market's gone. That ship has sailed. The only thing you can do is you can outsmart your competitors, but you can't make above average income anymore. The days of making hundreds of millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, those days are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone who's been working in the industry for the past 5 years or so is probably well aware of that because they've seen that shift. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to hear, your thoughts on it. Coming from, being involved with it since when was that? 1999 was your initial
Correct. Correct.
experience. So it's
Yeah,
interesting to hear how what you've seen, in terms of the market
correct.
shift in that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. To tell you, in the year 1999, the penetration rate of Botox was 0.1 of 1%. No one had heard of what Botox is. It was basically no one knew that you could, remove your wrinkles. No one knew. We spent all our time trying to explain to customers what this is, and no one wanted a needle in their face. Today they walk in, but the difference is 20 years ago there were 10 providers. Now there are 10,000 providers.
And so really the top tip, for that question in particular is, clear up your marketing message, make it very, very clear. That's probably going to already put you ahead of, maybe another 10 competitors in your town. The fact that their marketing message is quite messy or confused, just look for simplifying your business and your marketing.
Marketing is a key part of the business, and that to me is number one. But understanding business, understanding money, understanding how much you're putting out of your pocket, how much time does it take for you to take that money back? How big should your retail store or your cosmetic clinic be? I see people who are setting up 200 square meter stores where they could get away with 30 square meters. So their break even point ends up much lower. So putting a lot more thought and attention into what your break even point is, the location of that clinic, how you generate customers, coming back to the marketing message. And people don't pay attention to the basics.
Yeah, I think that's really good. That is, Babak. Thank you. What inspired you to consider franchising? Because I think that was part of the model, wasn't it? Franchising.
Yeah. So in Australia, the regulation is so. No, I'll take a step back. It is impossible for one or two people, my partner and I, Alistair and I, to run 10, 20, 80 cosmetic clinics. Because if a beauty therapist were to ring up and say, I'm sick, I'm not coming in, what do we do? How do we get someone in there? The hardest bit of running the clinics is front of shop. What Alistair and I did really well was we did the back of shop. We gave them everything they need to enable them to run the front of shop. And what we did, we were, and I believe, I understand that we were the very first in the world to do joint venture franchising. So we owned 50% of the clinic. The franchisee owned 50% of the clinic. Now, why did we do franchising? In Australia, if you have two shops where you mandate them to do the exact same products, then you're technically your franchise. You have to follow the franchise code. So we became a franchise by default, but it made all the sense in the world. But we didn't know what franchising was when we first got into it.
So again, it was just through the process of doing that you actually discovered what it was that you were actually building.
Correct. Nobody teaches you at school or university what is franchising.
No, they really don't. How many hours a day did you have to work to get laser clinics going, realistically? And did that get better or worse?
It reminds me of the Beatles song, 8 days a week. It never ended. It never ended. It was, but at school, all the way from primary school, I studied harder than everyone else. My friends were out hitting the soccer ball. I was in there studying. I was writing essays. I did that right through high school, right throughout university, and right through my working life. I had the one thing I had was extreme drive, and I always wanted to stand out from the pack. And there is no substitute for hard work. And there's no one who's going to do it quite as well as what you do, because no one's as passionate and dedicated as you.
No, it's funny because I always say a very, very similar thing when I've got students on some of my coaching, and it's just within an individual, and it's something that you can't teach, and it's either you love the work and you're passionate about your work, and that is something you can't teach. And like you say, you were like it from a young kid, and I was very similar. For me, growing up, that's exactly how I was, and it's how I am now. I'm 35 now.
Yeah. Well, the Botox has worked. There you go.
Thank you.
So, I have a lot of people who will reach out to me for lack of a better term, business advice. Now, the first thing I realize after a brief conversation with them is they want to be rich, but they're not willing to put in the work, and it doesn't work. And I'm very direct with them. It's not they go, oh, I want a better lifestyle. I don't want to work for an employer. I want to be my own boss. But they They typically don't understand what they're risking in doing that, and unless they work twice as hard as what they were, it will likely fail.
Yeah, and I think everybody loves the idea of being their own boss, but the reality is quite something else. And I don't think, everyone loves this idea of being self-employed. Everyone loves this idea of having freedom of choice around, how they work, when they work, where they work, fine. But the reality is something else.
It's I agree that most people have an unrealistic expectation of what it is to be their own boss. Now, but but if you get it right, it is substantially better than working for someone else. I could never go and work for someone else, but I now know the system. I understand how to succeed in business. But you've got to have that formula right before you do it. Just because you say I don't want to have a boss doesn't mean you should go and become your own boss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know many people that have gone down that road, and and it's been not what they expected, and so they've gone back to employment, and actually they're much happier for it because they can work in other clinics. They don't have to own their own clinic. You can still have a boss, you can still have someone, and still work in
Yeah,
aesthetics, but
yeah,
you go
yeah,
and work for someone else, and actually that's a better model for them. It isn't for everyone.
yeah,
I think there's this constant
yeah.
need to want to own your own clinic, for example, and actually it's not right for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, as a nurse, you have the benefits of being able to work for someone else, but to be a contractor. You're effectively your own boss without having any of that risk. You can spend 5, 7 years building up your client base using someone else's capital. In effect, having the benefits of an employee, but having the upside of having your own business. That's what I would do. If I were a nurse, I would focus on getting my skill sets perfect. Now, the interesting thing is, I'll meet a lot of nurses who've been injecting for a year and they say they're the best injector. Now, I know it takes many years to become an, oh my God, incredible injector, but in their minds, they genuinely believe they're the best injector. And they don't understand that they will not succeed in business unless their treatments are better than their peers' treatments. And so they are better off working for someone else, gaining their experience, building up their client base, and making more than they would as an employee because they're a contractor. And once they've bedded all of that down, they could then consider working for themselves.
I think it stunts your growth a little bit as well. When you kind of already think you've hit your peak. When you do that, I think you stop growing at that point because you already think you've made
Yeah,
it there. And I just, I think it's
yeah,
always worth feeling
yeah,
like there's something more to learn. There's
yeah.
something more
There's
I can get
yeah,
out of this.
yeah. There's uh, you've disclosed your age now. Time for me. I'm 58. I'm still learning. At age 57, I thought I knew everything there was to know. At age 27, I thought there was everything I need to know, but I keep learning. I keep learning from my experiences. It's the same thing with injecting. You will continue refining those skills, but certainly after a year, you don't have that experience.
No, no, and like I say, I think you're only doing yourself a disservice. Maybe your clients as well, but I mean, I think, especially for yourself, you're doing yourself a disservice by thinking that you've already peaked at that point because there's just so much more to learn and to gain from having a different way of seeing yourself. That you're always the student. I think is not a bad thing.
That sounds like an ancient Chinese saying, a Confucius saying, but sure, I'll go with it. I like it.
So who funded the launch of your clinic in the beginning? Did you
Oh,
have personal
yeah,
funds there?
at the time, it was very cheap. So Alistair and I decided we were going to buy a laser device. At the time, the laser device was a couple of $100,000. Alistair and I figured out, the formula how to repair these lasers. So we managed to buy a second-hand laser for about $40,000. So we substantially reduced our input costs. The shop fit out that we did was done on the cheap. So between the two of us, it cost $100,000 to set up the first clinic. And after the first clinic, it basically rolled out and funded itself. So it was really that investment of 100,000 that became eventually 650 million. Mind you, we didn't get all of that. We had partners along the way, but it was that initial investment that we hit out of the park.
Unbelievable. How did you meet Alistair?
Oh, Alistair used to work for me in the capacity of my IT manager in my initial business. We came up with a concept of doing a business that was discounted laser hair removal. And we thought we couldn't do that without obtaining machines cheaply. And a large portion of the machine repairs related to IT work. So Alistair went overseas, learned how to do that, and we had the perfect yin and yang to roll out the cosmetic clinics. He
Smart.
did the machines and I did the clinics.
Really smart. Like you say, having that yin and yang. I think that's really important. You know, do you think having a business partner is key to success in business? Do you think that that's,
Yeah, I've
quite an
always
important
found,
part?
yeah, I've always found it's important for me because it's almost like having a crutch. It's having someone that you run, that you call more than you would your partner, and you're constantly running ideas past them. It's a sounding board, and it's someone who will will say slow down, or someone will say no, you need to hurry up and do this faster. But someone who sanity checks everything you do, and someone whose financial interest is completely aligned with yours. So for me, it was very much a net positive. If I did business today, I would certainly have a partner unless I were a nurse and I was setting up a very small clinic, which is a 1 to 2 room clinic, then that does not make sense.
So it all depends on the size of the business model, really, as to whether you would consider
Correct. And
having a
and
partner.
and and, and how big you want to get. If I'm opening up one gymnasium, I don't want a business partner. But if that's becoming 100 locations, I certainly do. Plus, then I need franchisees as well. So don't
Yeah,
forget the franchisees are effectively our business partners. We're a 50-50 partnership. So Alistair and I are 50-50 partners in a franchisor entity, but we are 50-50 partners with the franchisees. So in each clinic, Al and I owned 25% of the shares each, and a franchisee owned 50%. So in effect, we had shareholders, we had partners at every level of the business.
Mm. Did you find that model quite tricky? How did you feel a responsibility to look after every single, franchisee? Like how to
Yeah,
not come from that
yeah,
background, to suddenly have that
yeah.
many
Yeah.
people that you're working closely with?
What happened with us, every single franchisee made a lot of money in the period of time that Al and I were there. But that's when it was special market circumstances. So we didn't need to sit there and think, oh my goodness, what's happened to the franchisee? They've put their house on the line. Al and I, in the beginning, we got our money back in 5 months. Down the track, we got our money back in, say, 12 to 14 months. And the franchisees would get their money back in 20 to 25 months. So they were happy, and they had left, they typically left their jobs where they were making 80,000 a year, and they're making 280,000 a year with us. And they were much happier without having a boss and making more money. So we never had franchisee issues during the time that Al and I were running the business.
Mm. Would you work in aesthetics again, knowing what you know now? I feel like I know the answer of that.
I think we're so well tuned that we both we complete each other's sentences. The market has shifted. In Australia, I would not do it today because the prices are ridiculously low. People are selling treatments at below the cost of the actual treatment. Plus, there's new legislation in place in Australia that with cosmetic injectables, you are not allowed to use the word, for instance, anti-wrinkle treatment. You
Mm.
certainly can't use the word Botox, and you
Yeah, you're not
can't
here
advertise the
to.
price. So,
Yeah,
so
you
you're
can't.
not
Yeah.
allowed to, so you're not allowed to say what you sell, and you're not allowed to say the price you sell it at. Now, if you go back to the conversation 20 minutes ago, it was all about tell them what you sell, tell them the price you sell it at. Now, you can't do that. You think, well, what is the purpose of opening a clinic where you can't tell people what it is you sell? Now, you can't do that on Instagram. You can't do that on TikTok. You can't do that at front of house. You can't do anything. So if someone were to walk into your store and say, do you sell Botox? Technically, you can't say yes. And so in Australia, given the intense competition, given the increase in rents, given the increase in salaries, I would not recommend aesthetic medicine at this juncture. There are lower risk, higher return investments.
Mm. Yeah, I know we have a similar problem here as well with regards to anti-wrinkle. So like you say, it muddies your marketing message. It makes it quite difficult. Now, we don't have the same issue with dermal fillers at the moment. However, we do have regulation changes on the horizon. We don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know whether they're going to roll out that kind of requirement across all treatments, at which point that makes it incredibly difficult to advertise
Yeah, yeah,
anything at all.
yeah. In Australia, we have state-based regulation, and the states follow each other. New South Wales will do something, and then Tasmania will follow. It would not in any way surprise me that the regulators in the UK will look at what's happening in Australia. Regulators in New Zealand will have a look at what's happening. Okay, let us take elements of what they're doing. So I'm not upbeat on legislative changes in this segments of the market. And in particular, my view is the regulator has overshot the mark. There were some issues in Australia, particularly with cosmetic surgery, and the regulator has just stamped their foot and they've taken a very hard approach. And in the end, if you look at cosmetic medicine, what's happening? Cosmetic surgery, people will fly to Turkey or Thailand to have treatments. It's not like the people aren't having the treatments, they're going somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. So same here. You know, we hear a lot of it, especially Turkey's a popular one here. So yeah, similar sort of issue. You seem to live quite the private life online. There's a lot of stories about you, Babak, but you're not that active. So are you
Um,
involved in other businesses today? Have you
I,
got other
I, d-
businesses?
I don't have any businesses. I it, it took me a long time to figure out that making money is easy, losing it is even easier. So I've taken a very conservative approach with my investments. I no longer need to make 20, 30, 40% a year. I'm happy to make a consistent 6 to 8% a year. So I invest through a family office, private wealth, and the majority of my funds are in effect, private debts through funds. So there'll be a fund that'll lend out money to 40 different organizations or property developers, and I'll be in multiple funds such as those. I invest in a lot of property, both directly and indirectly. I'm upbeat on the Australian economy insofar as net immigration will continue to be positive in Australia. Currently, we have about 500,000 people moving to Australia on a population of 26 million. They need a place to live. So I've invested in a lot of uh, affordable housing near the city. And that's done very well. Now, my view is I don't need to take risk anymore. I've already done that. That's come through. It's like I'm at the casino. My bets have come in. I've cashed
Know
in
when
my
to stop.
chips. And it's really important. So if you follow people who've made, it's a lottery effect. People who win the lottery after 5 years, they have less money than they started off with because they don't know what to do with the money. And I've been very cautious not to end up in the same situation. And I've taught these skills to my children because when I'm gone, I would like them to know how to manage the money.
Yeah. Yeah, because like you say, bringing it back to the beginning of the conversation, it's not something that we're taught. It isn't. And, you're not taught how to handle that amount of money. You're just not. So, like you say, it's that lottery effect that seems to happen. People suddenly get all the money that they've ever dreamed of having. But then what do you do with it? How do you invest that wisely? And how do you not risk losing it all?
Yeah, it's people take unnecessary risk. If you take a large sum of money and you make 6% per annum on it, that's more money than you could ever spend. Then why take the risk to try to get that, 26% return? Because if you don't get that right, you'll end up at zero, and it's a terrible place to be. Now, I will see, I mean, last few years, what does everyone talk about? Bitcoin, 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 Bitcoin,
Oh,
Bitcoin.
yes.
It's nonstop. Now, I've been wrong on my call of the Bitcoin price, but let's see, with the benefit of hindsight in a few years' time, whether it ends up being a giant Ponzi scheme, which I'm
Mm.
convinced it is. And
Yeah,
and you're
quite a
welcome
few
to come
people
back to
are.
this comment. You're
Yeah, I
welcome to come
will.
back to this comment in a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. You hear about Bitcoin a lot, and I know a lot of people that feel a similar way to you. But like you say, that time will tell with that particular
Correct.
investment. Time will tell.
Right. But the interesting thing about Bitcoin is people want a get rich quick scheme, and they feel like they're missing out because when the price goes up, that's what everyone talks about. Oh, have you seen Bitcoin? Have you seen Bitcoin? And if you haven't got in, people go, oh, you've got to get in. I got in at 4,000. It's now 6,000. Oh, you're missing out. So the people are getting at 6,000. It just keeps perpetuating that till one day someone goes, what's happened with this? Why is the price where it's at?
What sort of person do you think it takes to build a successful business? I think we've kind of touched on some of the personal qualities throughout, but
You've got to be you, you've got to be an extremely hard worker, dedicated, diligent. You've got to be willing to take measured risk, but you need risk capital. You need that capital. You can't start off a business by saying, look, I've got $25,000 to invest. You've got to have the money, and you've got to be willing to take the risk of losing that money. And I would recommend starting at an age well below 40 because it's a lot harder to succeed after that age. You don't have the same drive. My view is the best stage is in your late 20s, early 30s, where you have enough experience and you have enough drive. You've got the perfect nexus between the two.
yeah, I think timing is everything on that. I agree. You do need a bit of that experience as well, like you say, just life experience in general. It doesn't even have to be business experience. I think life experience counts for a lot.
That is key because a lot of your business is managing people, and you need to understand how to interact with people, and that comes over time. If I look at myself at this age versus even 5 years ago, substantially different.
What are the downsides of being successful in business? Are there any?
You get asked to go on to a lot of podcasts. There are none. It's just, I'm telling you, I've been to the top of the mountain. I've seen the promised land. It's pretty good. Come join me.
I think that everyone will be wanting to join you after listening to this anyway. That's for
They're
sure.
welcome to. There's plenty of
Every,
space.
everyone will be heading off to their clinics and ripping all those those different marketing message stickers right off the front of their building after this.
Keep one
Keep
simple
one.
message. Keep it simple. Keep it very simple.
If you had to start over today, what would be one of the first things you would do to begin building a business in aesthetics? So we appreciate that obviously we're in a different time, but knowing what you know in the market now, what would be the first thing that you would go out and do if you've got no clinic at all?
I what I would do is different because I could go around and merge 30 different cosmetic clinics. I could go and buy them on a multiple of 2 to 3 and sell them on a multiple of 8. If I was starting off with one clinic, if I were a registered nurse starting off with one clinic, I would I would set up shop within someone else's clinic. You've got no capital cost. There are so many clinics with spare treatment rooms, with a spare reception staff. Go up and say to them, I'll give you 30,000 a year, 50,000 a year to rent that and to use all your facilities. I'll bring in my own products. I'll do my own scripting. And the clients that come in, if I treat your clients, I'll give you 50%. If I bring in my own clients, I'll give you 10%. It costs you very little to do that. Don't initially go and set up your own clinic from scratch. And it's difficult in the Australian market to do laser hair removal. That portion of the market is being done to death. So keep your model very simple.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that because I would say here I think there's still a lot of room with laser hair removal. It's probably quite recent that we're seeing more and more people offering that actually, particularly with the initial investment in machines and things. So it's interesting, that obviously
Yeah.
you guys have cornered that completely in Australia.
Yep. Yep. The markets in the UK will do exactly what it did in Australia. There will be a lot of money to be made in that first 8-year period. And I think the UK really started about 5 years ago. They started doing discounted treatments. The prices are lower now than they were 5 years ago. And in 5 years' time, they will be ridiculously low. If you're getting in, and I don't know the UK market anywhere near as well as I know the Australian market, but if you're getting into the UK market with cheaper prices, take advantage of it now before the prices completely collapse like they have in the Australian market.
Do you think there'll be any recovery from that? Do you think that just perpetuate continually, or do you think there'll be some sort of market recovery in terms of prices?
I don't see it because there are a multitude of smaller players desperate to drop the price, and all the local providers are doing a price match. So you can go. There's a provider in Australia now who does full body treatments of laser hair removal for $90. Now that's the equivalent of I'm guessing is that 50
Yeah,
British pounds, and that's
about
including
50.
your VAT. That's about including VAT. Now people will go into the local laser clinics in Australia and they'll go price match. Now now I'm not sure whether they price match those prices, but that's where the market's going
Mm,
because those smaller players will continue being there. This is not a this is not a Coca-Cola where there's one drink and people go, I want that specific drink.
mm.
They all taste like Coca-Cola. They're all a Candela Gentiles in the Australian market. They all do the same thing. you it's not like a Chanel bag where you're wearing a Chanel bag and people see it. No one looks at you not having hair and saying, oh, what brand laser hair removal did you? Or did
It's
you go
true.
to laser clinics Australia? So people pay for a brand name, but if people can't see whether you've got Botox or Dysport in your face, they're not paying a premium for that.
Mm,
You can charge a small premium by being a more experienced nurse or doctor, but those days you can't charge 10 times more than the other person, like Chanel can.
mm. It's so true.
You know, there's no Birkin bags in this industry. There is no Birkin bag. There is no, you want to see anyone, you walk right in and you have the treatment.
Mm.
In spite of the fact that many injectors genuinely believe that they're like Birkin bags.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You do see that quite a lot. And, as much as you will get some loyalists and you will get some loyal clients that, like you say, are there for the individual, I would say that 50% of people will shop around. And I've said this before, they will look for where they can get it cheaper. And as much as people don't want that to be the case, that's just human behavior. That's just the
It,
reality of how people operate.
it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Follow the money.
Yeah. Did you lose or forfeit anything in life due to creating a business as big as it was? What was
No,
there
not
a
at all. Not
downside?
at all. Not at all. I've tracked my life where it would have ended up with or without laser clinics, and this is substantially better. There is nothing I feel like I've missed out on life in getting to this success. There has been no downside, but it was in the perfect market at the perfect time. If that wasn't the case, I would give you a substantially different answer.
How did the sale of the business come about? Were you approached, or was you getting to a point where you guys were thinking about selling?
I was like the popular high school girl. There were a lot of
A lot of
boys
offers.
knocking on the door.
Yeah, I
There were,
bet.
and so what happened is we entered an award, which was the Australian Business Review Weekly Awards, and we won that award. We were the fastest
Wow.
growing franchise in the country, and the third fastest growing company in the country. The third fastest growing company in the country, and we had a lot of private equity interests. They just reached out to us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't until then that we thought, oh, wow, people want us. They're knocking on our door.
And they're throwing
And the
numbers out.
price kept going up.
Yeah.
Oh, look, initially they throw a number at us, which was 20 million. And it was all the money in the world. You go back to roughly 2013, 14, where we had that first offer, and we sold half the business in 2014 for around 70 million, but the opening offer was 20 million. And we were going to take that. But in the time they negotiated that, the business kept doing better. So the price kept going up. And the longer that negotiation went on, the higher the price went.
So how long did it take from those initial first offers? How long did it take before you decided, was it that point where you thought we need to get out
Yes,
now?
because
You were reaching that peak?
Yeah. So if someone so you've got to always do this in reverse. And let me talk about the big figure of 650 million. If you had 650 million, would you take all of that money invested in one business?
No.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
So therefore, the reverse of that equation must be true.
Yeah.
The reverse must be true. And it was an easy decision. You de-risk, because if that business goes down, you lose everything. If you cash in that money, in effect, I've invested across 400, 500 different businesses. You can have, 100 of those failing and I'm still fine. But I didn't want the risk of one individual asset. And it comes down to basic economics.
Sure. So I think we're starting to work towards the end now. I've kept you for nearly an hour. Thank you, Babak. You've been amazing. The Faces app is a very comprehensive platform that allows newer practitioners or more established clinics to operate their entire business from one system. That includes consent forms. We've got over 100 of them that have been verified as meeting insurance requirements. We've got a booking system, a pharmacy where you can get connected with local prescribers and purchase stock. We've got finance. There's lots on the platform all in one place. Does this sound like something that would have sort of helped you way back in the beginning in launching your first clinic? And do you
anything would have helped me, because there was nothing.
Nothing.
Anything is better than nothing. That's the first I've heard about this app. I think it's a brilliant idea. Genius.
Thank
Brilliant.
you. Yeah, and I mean, it was built by, Ben and Nash, the founders of Faces, built it for their own clinic. So it's a similar story to you in the sense that they built something because they needed something. And they literally didn't set out to build an app. They just needed one place to fulfill all requirements. They needed consent forms that were pre-filled. They weren't faffing around filling a consent form every time. And so they had it for their own clinic. And then before you know it, their friends at other clinics were saying, well, can we use the app? Can we use the consent forms? And before they knew it, they had, hundreds of people interested and thousands of people. And so it's interesting you had a similar sort of journey, in that respect.
Yeah. The interesting thing is Alistair and I, we brought in machines cheaper into the country, laser hair removal devices, then people asked us if they could buy them. So we made a lot of money from that business, in line with what, not quite as much as what we made out of laser clinics, but up there with laser clinics. All we did is we sell machines at a 50% discount to what the local distributor was selling it at.
Yeah. I mean, do you have a platform like Faces in Australia that you know of that has essentially just one place to gather all of your clinical, information?
I do not. So there's a market opportunity for you. Yeah. Was that a business offer? Are we going into business?
Who knows?
Is Bobby back? Is he coming back?
Is he? No, we're looking at expansion. I know that they're looking at the US, but it was interesting to know if there are any competitors out there that you're
No,
aware of
not
at
to, not
least.
to my knowledge, but I've been out of the market for
Sure.
7 years now.
So who knows? Things change, things move quickly.
Mm. I'll look for the app in the local markets coming in 2024.
Is there anything that you wanted to mention today that we've not managed to cover or that we've missed, or sort of a leaving message for those that are listening?
Yeah, yeah, just yeah. th- I have one message: work hard, stay humble.
Mm. I think that's perfectly succinct. And I think that sums you up in a nutshell, Babak. So thank you so much. You've been absolutely wonderful. We really appreciate you coming on. Your insight is obviously incredible, and I think it's added so much value to people that are listening today. And for me too, it's been great to talk to you. I've got a lot out of it too. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jess, and it goes both ways. Thank you for your time.